At the time, I was programming. So I was like, oh, I would have time to learn how to fly a plane if I wasn't programming.
Olivier, watch out for your levels. They're getting a little hot there.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find out more about what we do at officehours.global. Our first hour is general discussion about media and virtual production. Second hour is usually something we want to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're really excited to have Olivier Rouchard. He is going to be here talking about checklists and planes and why it's important. And I think that there is a lot that we can all learn from someone who does these kind of checklists, who works through these things in how we approach our live streams. So in our events. And so Olivier is been kind enough to join us, and he's going to talk about how they do it in the big game, where it is actually like when we do live streams, we constantly remind somebody like it's not life and death, but in Olivier's world, it is life and death. So we're going to learn a lot about why checklists are important and how they're approached. So stay tuned for that. And also a reminder that at 11 o'clock this morning, we have Amber Mac, is going to be on on Gray Matter with Michael Krasny. And we have a link of that in Discord, so you can actually jump in and ask questions of Amber if you'd like. So stay tuned for that. And finally, Saturdays are starting to become kind of a place where we're doing testing, we're doing learning, and so we're having new hosts. Josh Kaufman will be hosting tomorrow. And if you're interested in being on the panel, this is a great day to be on the panel. It's on Saturdays to kind of see how it all feels and kind of see if it works for you. So we definitely, if you're interested in that, just ping one of us and we'll tell you how to get there. All right. Now we're going to go ahead and jump into the questions. Mitchell, what do we have?
Thank you, Alex. Our first one in from Jens Olson in Sandpoint, Idaho. What is everyone's favorite uses of loopback?
Go ahead, John.
So Chris and I think, use loopback for the same reason. Running multiple apps back into Monitor, back into Zoom. And so that way I can do stereo audio or system audio back into Zoom, so I can play back videos or do screen shares with video, YouTube videos, all that stuff. And I've got, about 20 apps fed back in and monitoring back into the Claret. That's what I use loopback for.
Go ahead, Kenneth.
So John uses it as a way to collect inputs. I use it as a way to distribute outputs. In Zoom session, I have one loopback named receive audio and another one named send audio. And it's a way of taking the Zoom call and putting it into every output I've got so that I don't have to go finding a way to switch to figure out why I can't hear anything in these while I can hear it in those, or I wish I could hear it in that. It just goes everywhere. And that's the easiest way for me to distribute things into multiple locations.
Go ahead, Serge.
In my case, I use it to isolate the flow rate input one for my microphone to go directly to Zoom. That way, I'm sure none of my other sounds go back to Zoom. And another use I got is having my main output going to my flow rate and also duplicate that output to my AirPods Pro. That way, I don't have to switch audio anywhere.
Nigel?
Well, I had Dante. I'm learning my way through Dante in Virtual Sound Card, and it allows me to send different things from my Mac to different channels of Dante, and then I can mix them on the mixer. And the other use is Teams, every time it updates, changes the way Virtual Sound works. And invariably, I have to go back to loopback and work out how to get audio from the place I want it to the place I want it to be.
Go ahead, Chris.
So I use the MixPre 6, and when you go into the audio MIDI settings on your Mac, when you first purchase some of these devices, it's a good pro tip to maximize the number of inputs and outputs via USB that the Macintosh sees from that device. When you do that with the MixPre 6, miraculously, it has 8 audio outputs. I don't know how that works, but I take 7 and 8, and I've created a loopback that is called My Mic. And I take my mic inside the MixPre, send it out to that patch, I call it. I like to think of loopback as a patch bay. So my mic is always this mic, only this mic. It'll never get anything else on it. I patch that. I use loopback to patch that into, say, Adobe Premiere if I need to record a VO. Super tip here, that is my input into Unity. So my Unity comms gets my mic and absolutely nothing else. So that's my favorite use.
Go ahead, Paul.
My favorite is special sources. I like to add things like Siri and text to speech. And there's a way you can use the Siri voice on text to speech. It's too complicated to go into now, but that's my favorite application for that.
Next question.
John Snyder from Reno, Nevada. During the Mixeffect demo, the dynamic background on Keynote had a fairly choppy animation, at least on YouTube playback. Any ideas why? Is this a limitation of Zoom, sharing screen using atem, or something else?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I'm going to guess it's a scaling issue. When you scale stuff, you get aliasing, which also pushes the computer to start erratically playing back.
You go ahead, Chris.
It's probably because he was using a screen share, I believe. Screen share has less frame rate, more resolution. That's my thought.
In general, I don't think he was using screen share. I think he was using. I think he was just cutting to it. But I think that. But the issue really is that soft motion. So the dynamic backgrounds will be great when you're doing presentations in the room. They're not. We stated this, I think, when we were talking about them when they came out. Is that they're probably not a great idea for Zoom or for anything that is compressing the footage. The issue is that they kind of defeat all of the temporal compression. So basically, they're constantly moving. What a lot of things want is things not to change very much. So when you're doing compression, you want most of the frame to stay the same. When you don't do that, the spatial compression starts to just kind of grab onto it and throw stuff out. And if it runs out of that, it just starts dropping frames. It just starts saying, well, I don't have enough memory. I don't have not enough memory, not enough bandwidth to play that out. And so dynamic backgrounds slowly moving are kind of the worst thing for compression, other than LED walls. And so I think that most likely that dynamic background was just being choppy because there wasn't enough bandwidth to represent it well. And so you'll see that a lot if you start using those in your presentations. So probably that's why I'm probably not gonna use them in my presentations. I think they're cool, but I think that if you're doing it online, you want that background to be stable. Next question.
Guy Cochran from Seattle, Washington. At a remote insert studio, what kind of instruction does a guest receive before the show? Eye contact seems fantastic.
So Guy, this would be someone who's sitting down at an insert studio?
Yeah, what I'm just noticing when I watch some of these broadcasts like CNN, they maintain like perfectly. Whereas if you look at the panel right now, everybody's off like, looking at something else. But you look at CNN and it's just bang, dead on. And I know they have one thing to concentrate on. We're looking at next questions and doing some research and whatnot. Right. But it just seems like, man, they had to have received some coaching.
The irony is they don't see anything. They see a camera. They're just I've been a guest in an insert studio. You just see a camera. And then they just say, look at that camera. Like you're just talking to the camera. So there's another thing that you will notice that while the eye contact is really good, and again, we're looking at all kinds of things in front of us, very close to us. They're just looking at a camera and talking. But one of the things, and sometimes they'll have some notes below it, so literally most of the time it's like paper notes and so on and so forth. And the most common ones are like, you're talking to this person. You're like, there's a lot of these, they're especially if they're doing something what we call an SMT, a satellite media tour, which is they're showing up at lots of these things. We'll change those out and say, you're talking to Jim Smith in Kansas KTCL, so that they know who it is that's in front of them. And then there may be some talking points that are around it. So they may look away a little bit, but for the most part, they're just looking at a raw camera with no return. And the reason they don't do a return is because it would cost more to send the signal back to them, and they don't want to pay for it. Go ahead, Nigel.
Yeah, I've been in a couple of different examples. The first example, I walked in and there was a thing on the wall behind the camera that gave the instructions, sort of big animal pictures. The other thing I've noticed is if it's first thing in the morning, you don't get a lot of help. If you're there for like the 6 o'clock drop in, there's like a guy shows you, says, sit there, look at that camera. But if you're there in like the middle of the day on sort of a CNBC type thing, there's a lot more assistance. There's a lot more, up to the point where someone actually might sit in the room with you. But invariably what you're doing is staring at a camera because you have no idea when they're going to come to you. So it's like almost in fear, you just keep looking.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitchell.
I always feel bad for when they're doing like a 3-up on CNN and it's the last person that gets asked for their commentary. And they maintain like for 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is. And I like to watch them, see them start squirming or whatever else. It's a real talent to be able to do that.
And you'll also notice because they're not looking at anyone. So one of the things we noticed when we started doing Interatron is that the eyes, and you don't notice that there's another red pill. So I'm going to give you a red pill little thing so you can close your ears if you just want to watch the news and not be bothered by this. But this will bother you forever as soon as I tell you. So when you're not looking at someone, your eyes don't converge. So your eyes have this funny thing where they converge in a certain way, and then you mirror them a little bit. Like people just mirror each other just a little bit. And we noticed it when we started doing Interatron, which we thought was like goofy, like what? You're going to put a mirror in front of the what? And but we had a client at Salesforce that was really obsessed with it, and he was totally right because it was just this great solution. And so we started using it for everything. But as we got used to it, we got used to the fact that someone is really responding to the person that's on the other side of them, and their eyes do something different, and their face does something different. So once you see that, when you watch the news, what you see is dead eyes. Like they are there, and just watch them now. Now that I've ruined it for all of you that are watching this, watch how dead their eyes look and how dead their face looks a lot of the time because they don't see anything on the other end. They're just kind of staring that direction, and it really takes something. And as soon as you see it, you just don't want to watch it anymore. Like it feels very impersonal. It feels disconnected. It feels, and so their eye contact is good, but again, other than when they're, and even when they're talking, you can see a little bit of it, and notice the difference when they bring somebody in, like you look at I watch a lot of Sunday morning, like talk shows, but watch the folks that are around the table, like for this weekend with George Stephanopoulos, or whatever, like watch people around the table and watch their face, and then watch people who come in for the inserts and notice the difference in their face because they're not responding to each other in the same way. Go ahead, Chris.
Guy, I think the most interesting thing about the question is, and what we're finding out is they're getting very little coaching, but their eye contact, even if it's not converging, is really good. And I think that our task is to simplify to gain success. Alex always talks about, we talked about the other day when you were looking at the microphones, the microphones that we had no physical scale for, that they had extra buttons and if they had too many buttons and knobs, that's going to, oh, look at that. That's a good size microphone. Yes, can we see Alex's camera?
You really did it.
Let's take to Alex's camera here. You might have to, okay, we'll get to it, Alex. Sorry. Nobody in the show is seeing this. Anyway, too many buttons, too many knobs, too confusing, more chance for failure. And it sounds like, there you go, right there. That is slightly smaller than a banana.
First office hours example of banana for scale.
Yeah, banana for scale. So Chris sent me a package of. It's not just it's not a real banana. It's a plastic banana. It's not just one banana. It's a bag of, and not only is it a bag of bananas, I just want to point out, not only is it a bag of bananas, It's a bag of individually wrapped bananas. Like
Well,
these
of
are
course.
like COVID safe. You could hand these people and they unwrap them because it's individually.
I'm doing my best to destroy the planet one bag of bananas at a time.
So-
No,
One
but-
banana, two banana, three banana, four.
Let me tell
Five
you.
banana, six banana,
Let me
seven
tell
banana,
you.
more.
Let me tell you how complicated it is to try to explain to your wife why somebody sent you a bag of individually wrapped bananas.
Or
Like it's just
anybody.
it's like bananas. Anyway.
From what you're saying, it sounds like I should never actually meet your wife face to face. But the point being is that simplifying, taking complex things and simplifying them to achieve success is probably the most important thing that we do. We talk about, working with civilians, and we have to always think about that as we're building systems, designing workflows. How can we simplify this to be successful?
And some of the stuff that we end up doing with inserts, I mean, just to get back to the question, there is number one is you got to keep looking at that camera. Like if there's something, do not, once you're live, do not look away. Do not look. We just keep on, and then we usually have a PTZ there, so that if they do this little shift or they do this little shift, and we need to keep them in, we can move it around a little bit to readjust. We never give them a camera. We never give them a chair that has wheels or rotates. so like it's always like it's a straight seat, so that they can't rock around, because man, people just, wow, they, especially on a show, they'll get uncomfortable and now they're moving all over the place, and you got to figure that out. But look at it, try to stay still, and then we ask them. A lot of it is like, well, how was your morning and how did you go? And what is it? You're trying to like get them into the zone of it. There's also like, how long do you want them to be there? Generally, most insert studios want them seated in 20 minutes before the event, and to make sure that they can, hear a producer come on and say, can you hear me? If they're an insert studio, they want you a lot longer if you're coming in from home. Like typically like a national broadcaster will want you there for an hour and a half. Like they don't want you to go anywhere, and literally if you get up, someone's watching and they'll be literally call you on your phone like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, okay, we'll go. If you have to go to the bathroom, like, okay, it's fine, but please come back quickly. And because there's literally someone there just making sure that no one leaves. And the hard part that we have is that how long do you want to put people in so that they're there, but not so much that they wilt. They just get tired of being there. And so that's always the challenge. You want to make sure that they fit their IFB. Typically, you're giving them an IFB to listen to, so you spend time fitting it and making it work and making sure they can hear it just right. And so you have a person sitting there, working on it, and then you give them oftentimes a little knob. So we need to change it. It's right here for you, but you try to make sure that it's just right when you get going. Then the last little bits are you're looking over. You just kind of look at them from the top to the bottom. Tie, pin, mics, things, and you're literally just kind of almost like it is a checklist in a lot of ways. But I don't know if we've ever had a checklist, but we have someone in there that is you get used to looking for things. Their glasses, their shininess, their tie, their mic, their coat, like you're looking for anything that isn't right, because they're going to be on in front of a whole lot of people and you don't want them to be embarrassed, and so about that. And then the key is making sure they have water, making sure that they have, all those things are, you just kind of work through those things and you really want them to drink a little bit of water before a hit. Most of the hits that we've done in insert studios are very short. They're 8 minutes, 10 minutes. And so we're not worried about, too much water, but we do want them to keep from smacking their lips, and keep them from having, being dry. And so those are things that we do. So those are some of the instructions that we often give for those types of things. But yeah, when they're looking at the camera, just because that's the only thing someone will tell them is don't look away. So next question.
Serge Blondin from Montreal, Canada. Bill, how would you compare the shots you took with your iPhone versus the SLR at ComiCon?
Go ahead, Bill.
So that's a pretty big subject. Let me pop one of the photos I took, and I'll tell you, this is from the DSLR, and I don't know how it's rendering out, but you have more control with the images that come from a DSLR. In this particular case, his right shoulder was pretty bright, so it didn't balance as much, and you're seeing the right side of the photo is a bit overexposed, but in general, all I had to do was brighten his face just a little bit. And I like the warmth. It's actually reading a little redder on my monitor than it actually is in the photo on the computer, but it felt a little Rembrandt-y portrait, and I like that about it. So you have a lot of control. You can do a lot of things. Contrast that with the next one, which you'll see, which comes out of the iPhone. It's much more vibrant and things like that. Now, this fit for me because it is an architecturally modern looking thing. And I like that split. So the iPhone did a great job of balancing face and the architecture behind it. So it just really depends on the kind of shots you want. I mean, that is a photo illustration done from a DSLR shot. And so I applied a lot of processing to it. It held up really well. And that is another one right out of the iPhone with nothing but the right framing and using its HDR to its advantage. There are pluses to both. I also shot my DSLR first, and it was only the last day that I was there that I pulled up my iPhone and said, let me see what I can get from the iPhone. I was really satisfied with both, but I just think about them differently, and you have to think about light a little differently because all that computational photography in the iPhone will get you good results out of more complicated mixed light settings, and you can do a little bit less retouching. In fact, I don't think there's any on this. That last image you saw is just literally right out of the image sensor on the phone, and it can be magical.
Next question.
Paul Valhus from Austin, Texas. What tester do you use to check USB devices that gives you the most info?
So I use the I have the USB-C tester 3-in-1 Type C DC 5.5. It's like, I don't know if it has a real, but it's basically looks like a little octagon. I was trying to, it's usually right within my reach. But it's got, it can test a lot of different things related to USB. And I found that I haven't found something I couldn't test with that. So that's what I would suggest. You can find it on Amazon. It's like a USB tester, but it looks like a little octagon with lots of little things sticking out. I'm sure that it's one Chinese company that sells it through many others. So anyway, yeah, we'll put a link in the event chat. Next question.
Jens Olson from Sandpoint, Idaho. Mixeffect Pro. Does the iOS 16 background feature mean it can also be in the background on an M1 Mac, or does it still have to be a visible window?
No, I think that it has a little window that it pops up, but it doesn't have to be in the foreground. I think that's the key there. That what we went over yesterday, I believe. I haven't played with that one yet, but I think that's the key. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I mean, from the looks of it, it's just another app, just like anything else. So it's just running as an app. So you can see it. I don't have my Extreme hooked up right now, but it's just an app. So I have Keynote running back there, and it's just an app. So sure, you can minimize it and whatnot.
Yeah. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Killer Tracks is partnering with Abbey Road Studios for a curated production music collection. There's a link for it. Considering production music is mostly wallpaper, do you see a market for it?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
I wouldn't call production music, particularly from Killer Tracks, wallpaper, because it was one of the first libraries to come out that sounded like real music that could have been a hit song, and a huge variety. So I think that if you're really good at picking music, and some of us are, I'm not a musician, but I'm really good at picking background music, it'll work just fine. And the fact that they're partnering up with Abbey Road Studios, perhaps it'll give us some more range and choices, as it were.
Yeah. No, it looks like it could be useful. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, and production music is used for different purposes. Sometimes you're using it as a bed behind narration. Sometimes you want it to stand alone and carry the emotion or the pacing of a spot or something like that. So I would go to different libraries depending on that. In fact, one of my favorite libraries for many years, because I do a lot of narration and people were asking me to put music on it, was a library called Narrator Tracks. And they actually orchestrate that so that there's not a lot of activity in the range of a human voice. Now that's, kind of the upper mid-range, and above that is where you get the clarity. The music still sounded good and it still had pulse and it could move the thing along, but it didn't conflict as much. So I could leave the music a little bit higher than I would otherwise if I was using a full spectrum audio music track and trying to read over that. So there's just all sorts of music libraries out there. They're all pluses and minuses. Killer Tracks has been around a long time. They know what they're doing, and Abbey Road is certainly a brand that is very strong in the consciousness of the world. So it should do well.
Chris?
To what Bill was saying, my music library of choice is Premium Beat. They deliver most of their songs with stems, and you can load them in. And if there is an instrument that is fighting your vocals, you can turn down that one instrument, mute it all together. You can make a whole underscore of a track just by, picking your stems. It's really fantastic. And
yeah, I do the same.
And I would definitely disagree with the wallpaper comment.
I use Epidemic Sound, and I use it because they figured out all the licensing with Facebook and YouTube and everything else, so that if you use Epidemic Sound in your stuff and it ends up on YouTube, you don't end up with copyright strikes. And so anyway, and that's the hard part with lots of other, a lot of other tracks are bought by other people, and so you end up like you get something off of Pond 5, and next thing you know, it's got a whole bunch of flags because it was in a bunch of other things, on YouTube. And Epidemic Sound has kind of solved a lot of that. But it comes with those stems, as Chris said. And what I love is that you can go, oh, the drums are just a little too much, and I just pull them back a little bit. Just pull that back a little bit so that it has a little bit more of a background sound. Or you can go in there and you can go, well, I can play it really loud. Play all the tracks during the what I'm showing some video or showing some stills or whatever, and then it comes down underneath the voiceover, and it's still the song. But it's just it's still the stems that I want to show, so it has continuity between, some kind of something that I was showing and then back to it. It's really, those kinds of things. I don't know whether Kilotracks does that or whether this will do that. But once you get used to buying needle drop with stems, you can't go back. Like you cannot go back to having just a song or just a track. Like I just can't. I'm so used to now, playing with all of that. And I'm getting to the point where I just wish people would release more stuff in Logic, like all of it. Because when you open up some of those tracks, that some of the demo tracks, and you realize you could change so much, I think that's going to be the frontier is to really do not just stems, but much deeper things that people will pay for. People will pay more for.
I think there's good reasons why artists don't do that, though, because you can really mess something up.
Well, I don't think that
really, really mess something up.
No, I think that artists don't do it for their tracks, but I think that people who are building commercial tracks, though, they're just looking for the next, and what's amazing is we're going to probably have some folks on is that a lot of folks that might be in a band during the day are doing these kinds of tracks, for or they do this during the day and they're in a band at night, or something like that, and so they kind of separate those things out. Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, artists do it all the time because they do mix outs or dance mixes of their songs, and they repeat it and do all kinds of crazy things with it. They don't generally release them, but they make them available to specialists who are doing special versions of the mix.
Yeah, there was the first big release that I know of was the Shaman back in the late 90s or late 80s. They released something called Progen, and Progen was there was a song called Move Any Mountain, and Progen literally was every single sample on a record, like on 3 records. It's actually three vinyls. And it was for those of us who were, I know, I don't look like it now. Another life, I spun for raves. And so and it was gold because you had all the individual samples. You could throw it on an MK1200. You could pull it. You could just spin it in, and you could weave it into everything. And also there were, I don't know, probably 1,000 remixes of that song because of it. It was it went completely the opposite of what you think you should do, and it just exploded. Because of it was like every rave had that song or some version of that song on it. It was quite a thing. Next question.
From David Brady in New York, New York. One of Sunday's tasks has expanded beyond video production to digital archiving of books and photos. Seen some ads for the CZUR Scanner. There's a link for it. And wondering if it or any other solution might be better than flatbeds.
This one actually looks pretty good. I've not used this scanner. It does look like it's pretty high quality as far as that goes. Now, the reality is folks who are really archiving books, pull them apart, and scan them on. There's some high speed flatbeds that you can push those through. But like when you look at the Google, what you want to research is the Google book project that has caused so much trouble. But there's some movies about behind the scenes, and you'll see like the heavy lifting on that. But the curve, and this one looks like it has correction for the curve that it's figuring out. But it'll never be as good as taking the book apart. But sometimes you can't do that. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I think if you're doing it for archival purposes and you really want accuracy, flatbeds are still the way to go for flat material, clearly. I do notice that I'm doing less and less of that. I actually haven't pulled out my flatbed scanner in probably 5 years now, because most of the things that I want to archive on a photo are just so simple that I pull out my phone and just take a snapshot of it. It's not going to give you as good a perfect reproduction, but it's so quick and easy. And then once it's in the phone, I can use Photos or some other app to archive it, tag it. It's much more retrievable, and it's the thing I always have with me. So I'm probably doing 90% phone snapshot archives and just 10% of pulling out a flatbed and trying to do it for a longer lasting purpose.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Hey, Dave, when I left the church, I got Sundays off and a 10% raise. Just saying.
Yeah, and so I think that you do want to look at resolution. It looks like there's an option for different resolutions that might be available, and you want the highest resolution if you're thinking about, if this is an archive. That's the big thing, is if it's going to be an archive, then the biggest mistake people make is they go, well, I'm just going to take a picture of all of these with my phone, or I'm going to, and for what Bill's talking about, it's fine if it's just like, oh, I just need to grab this. But if you're like, I want to keep this, like when people talk about, like, you see these ads like save your photos with your phone and put them on, that is nuts, because now you're not going to, as soon as you think you archived it, you're not going to take care of the pictures the way that you did before. You are not going to, there's just a lot of things, and you should be archiving all of your paper photos because they're going to go bad and they're going to get stuff on them and everything else. But the key is that you want to spend the time to get a really good scan of things that matter. Now with books, you have to have a little bit of a mass processing. So I think something like this, but when you're talking about photos, we talked about it before, the Epson, I think this Epson 600 or whatever is a great flatbed scanner. You're going to get everything out of that photo that's there, and then you want to save that, but really think about that from an archiving perspective. Now, what's funny for me is I'm going back the other way, which is now I'm starting to print photos again. So I'm getting archive paper and taking the photos that I care the most about and printing them out, putting them in like basically an archive system, because I just don't trust that the digital ones will be there forever, and so I'm not trying to do every photo I've ever taken, but the key wedding photos, the key kids photos, the key family photos, the ones that I want to always have, I'm going to put them back on paper to make sure that because paper does, there's a picture of my grandfather when I was growing up, lasted 100 years, sitting on the wall, in a living room. So, you got to think about that. Next question.
And I'm going to slip in here. Ken Jordan from Surrey in the UK is up. Any recommended supplies of foam inserts for Pelican cases, plus any recommended tools for cutting foam inserts?
Go ahead, Mark.
So I know the cases that I've purchased come with perforated foam, which makes it easy to just remove those sections of foam for around your equipment to protect it. I don't know if it's because I'm buying Porta-Brace instead of Pelican, or if the replacement foams in generic can come perforated.
Yeah, the what we tend to call that is pick and pluck. Pick and pluck foam is what that is what that is, and it's problematic in the sense that eventually it all starts to fall apart all around all the edges. So when you use it a lot, it gets ratty. The pick and pluck starts to fall apart. And so it works, and we definitely do a lot of it. A lot of it is you take it's the typical, you set something down on top of it, and then you draw. You take a Sharpie and you go around it to kind of get a sense of what it should be, and then you pull those out. And we definitely do a lot of pick and pluck. If you're going to do something on long term, you may want something a little bit more robust as far as doing that. One thing to think about is a hot knife, or not a hot knife, but a hot wire. There's a hot wire system that you could basically just cut right through that, and then you're not limited to the pick and pluck. You just draw that line around it, and you can pull it through it, and it'll cut really nicely through that process. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, personally, I think pick and pluck is kind of a nightmare. My Pelican preference is these Trek Pack systems that they have. Mm-hmm. They're modular. You can move the walls around. If you really want to use foam, I would highly recommend Kaizen foam, Kaisan. Kaizen is a laminated system of foam, almost like laminates in a plywood. And what you do is you do the same thing that Alex said. You trace what you want, and then you can dig in with your fingernail and pull out just the depth that you need for the area that you need it. So you could make very complex Kaizen things. You don't have to have a fancy tool or anything. As a matter of fact, Kaizen actually has a little knife system that you can buy for their thing. And the other thing that's nice about Kaizen is, let's say you're buying, Pelican 1510 that we all have. They actually have Kaizen inserts that fit perfectly inside the 1510 to start with. But definitely check out Kaizen. Very cool.
Bill?
Yeah, a couple of things. First and foremost, I don't use a Sharpie. If I have to use pick and pluck, there are a couple of rules I have. I don't use Sharpie. I use toothpicks to set up the equipment thing because I find that I'm often wrong about how I do it, so it can move the toothpicks over. I also have an absolute rule, never less than 3 cubes. I never go below that because 2s and 1s do, as Alex say, fall apart and your case will become junk. 3 is the minimum. I like to have 4 between any objects in there. And the other thing is, if you really want to do custom, one of the best tools for any kind of foam cutting is actually the old style electric knives. We used to use them at Thanksgiving that have 2 blades and they oscillate back and forth. You can wield those like a lightsaber and cut even across foam pick and pluck things and do a much more custom thing.
Yeah, and what I was referring to, I was calling it a hot wire, but it's actually, if you do a search for, the one I have is a Go Change 3, but it's a foam cutter, electric cutting machine pens toolkit, tools kit. So that's what we use for that. And we use it, we put things in smaller cases, and they have a lot of detail that we're trying to cut around. And so when we do that, we need to have a little bit more precision than what's in the pick and pluck. Next question.
Next one comes to us from David Brady in New York City. And David says, recently built a new Pi with a 3.5-inch touch display built right in the case. Looking for a power bank solution about the same size as the case. Any thoughts? And he says, P.S. might need a jeweler's loupe to read the screen.
Very, very small screen. So he's looking for a power bank that is, I don't know if there's a Pi power bank. I mean, it seems like you feel like that should exist, like that someone built a power supply for, specifically for a Pi, but maybe it's not a large enough market. Go ahead, Paul.
There's something called a Pi Juice bank that fits exactly onto the Raspberry Pi, same form factor. And if you put a beefed up little battery on it, it'll go up to 24 hours. It's kind of like a combination battery UPS, and it's the same form factor. Just you bolt it on four screws.
Oh yeah, yeah. Now I see. I'm looking at some of those, and they look like they just screw right on. And some of these are like AA. They're not necessarily rechargeable, but of course you can do rechargeable AA's as well. Next question.
Next one comes from Andre Dahle in Berlin. And Andre says, Alex, will we have the opportunity today to do NDI room tests in after hours?
Yes. I forgot to put that in the email. So we'll have that in the email for next week. But we will be doing these between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. on Fridays, so Pacific Standard Time. So 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. on Fridays. You just know if you want to come in and be a guinea pig for NDI, and if you want to come in and test your NDI, 3 to 5 p.m. is going to be it. It might edge a little past 5, but we'll say 3 to 6. Give people a little bit of a window. So 3 to 6 p.m. There'll be a 3-hour window where if you want to test NDI, there's going to be a bunch of people there, hopefully. That will turn on their cameras, talk to each other, have a conversation. We've been doing this informally in the office because we need to test some stuff on our end. But we will be doing that formally, and anybody can jump in and grab that stuff. And so just know that if you come in from 3 to 6, we'll make it 3 to 6 p.m. on Fridays, that a lot of people may be grabbing NDI streams from the system to test how their system works. Go ahead, Bill.
And JJ had asked me a little bit ago if I could do some basic Final Cut training for him. And so we're doing that in after hours. We've been doing Fridays at noon. It's kind of informal, so stop by anytime you want to, and we'll be there today.
And that's noon Pacific Standard Time.
That's right. Correct. Thank you.
And we'll get that if it's going to happen regularly. Let me know, and we'll put it into the schedule.
Will do.
Next question.
Next one comes from Michael Vosbein in Woodstock, Georgia. Anyone seen the new HBO documentary series on Paul Newman? It features a lot of world-class actors, all presented in Zoom room format. The audio and video quality of each of them is just terrible, probably by design. Thoughts?
I don't think that it's by design. So I did watch the first episode. I also don't know if they actually did. I don't think they did the audio. Maybe they did the audio for the actual voiceover. So for those of you who haven't seen it yet, there's in the HBO documentary about Paul Newman and his wife, Joan Woodward. Paul Newman had interviewed I don't know, hundreds of people or many people in his life, and he was going to do some kind of memoir or something. At some point, he just decided to burn all the tapes. So he just burned all the tapes of all the interviews with everybody that he did this with. However, the biographer that was working on it had transcribed all the tapes. So they had all the text. They just didn't have the tapes. So what they did is they identified actors. I mean, it's Paul Newman, and Ethan Hawke reached out. He's got hooked into it and went out and attracted all these. I mean, I think Paul Newman's read by George Clooney, and there's all these different, they have all these great actors doing the voiceovers, for all the different people. And so each person has its own voice, and they rebuild all these discussions about it. And then they mix that in with interviews with people who are still alive and people who have things to say. And so it's not all that way, but anytime they're going back to that, and it's a really interesting way to do it. Like, I think that, and it's not that much different. I mean, that's what Ken Burns would do a lot, is read Sullivan Ballew's letter, or read this or read that, or read, different things like that. But I think that it is they did it. This is the most, and then there's a lot of jumping back and forth to Zoom, which again is horrible, but I've gotten to work with I had the opportunity over 2020 to do a lot of work with a lot of actors. I don't think they made it bad on purpose. Like, it was like what you see in that show is pretty much par for the course for 2020 as far as the quality of how actors were joining Zooms. They just they're actors. They're not technicians. And so they just were opening up their laptops and jumping in, and it was all bad framing, bad places, and bad everything, so that it was pretty accurate. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I was just saying, I was reading a review of that this morning, and it was a glowing review of the program. Again, they weren't looking at the technical side of it. They were looking at the content, and they were just saying this is like riveting for those of you who might be interested in that golden age of Hollywood, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward. It was really an interesting dynamic, because Joanne Woodward was actually the big star at that time they started this. She had been in, I think, The Three Faces of Eve, and was a queen of Hollywood. And then over the course of their marriage and or career and all the backstage divorce and everything, he became the bigger star. And I guess the dynamic of this life story is very compelling. The reviewer that I read was just over the moon about this. I'm really looking forward to watching it.
I watched just the first episode so far, and I thought it was really good. I mean, it's really interesting to watch. It's really well put together. Go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say 2020 is the year that all the actors began to really appreciate all the technicians that make them look and sound.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and by the way, the new and I think this is on Disney Plus. If you haven't started, I think we may even have screenings that we do inside of office hours because it's so good. The like little breakout rooms or something to talk about it. But wow, if you haven't seen the Industrial Light and Magic thing that's up on Disney Plus, holy smokes. Like, it is the best documentary I've seen in a long time. I cannot believe the amount of footage they had from the original, work, the behind the scenes footage. And they have interviews of George in 1979, and they have, all this other stuff. And they have, but they have, and what I thought was a parallel to office hours watching this thing was you had a bunch of passionate people in the 70s. And it was like, visual effects was just like virtual events. Visual effects was just getting started, and there was just all these people who were really passionate about it, and they were doing it on their own, and they were all doing it together. they all knew each other. They all were working together on it and figuring things out. And some of them were making money at it. Some weren't making money at it. Some were doing it, but they're all like trading notes and trying to figure out how to do this visual effects thing. And then what happened is suddenly there's somebody who needs a bunch of visual, George suddenly needed a bunch of visual effects folks, and suddenly because that community existed, they all just fused together and formed on ILM, but they were all like there. They were all Dennis Murin and Ken Ralston and, Doug Trumbull and like all these folks were all like, they all were in a community in LA and all talking about stuff and trading notes and working on projects together like we do, and figuring stuff out and knowing each other. And it was like anyway, just this incredible group of people. And when you think about it, like these people were the people that we kind of, when I was at ILM, they'd walk through the room and you're like, whoa, but they were just a bunch of teenagers in their early 20s and just loving what they did, doing what they love to do. And then a need happened that fused them all together, and if they hadn't existed, that need, Star Wars would have never gotten made. And if Star Wars hadn't gotten made, they wouldn't have, the whole industry probably would have gone on for quite some time without that happening. Go ahead, Bill.
This mining archives thing, I think the dam for this broke with the Beatles Get Back thing that Peter Jackson did. And I just think we're going to see a lot more. And I think it's fascinating and compelling content. This taking big archives of material that are available and looking back with a cute lens. It's fascinating.
One would argue that it broke with Ken Burns.
Well, yeah, but
just to be fair, like
you're
we're
right.
rebuilding
the Civil
stuff.
War is looking, but this contemporary thing and turning it into a big. I mean, Ken Burns had a lot, but that was PBS broadcast. This is global now.
Yeah, it's pretty global when it came out. By the way, someone should do a whole thing with Ken Burns, but. Civil War is not his first show, his first rodeo. He did a really good one on Roebling that I would highly recommend. Next question.
Next question from Paul Valhus in Austin, Texas. I bought a AUKEY powered USB hub, aluminum 10-port USB 3.0 hub with one quick charge 3.0 port, 2 AirPower charging ports, 7 USB 3.0 data ports, 12-volt 4-amp power adapter from my Mac M1. Good? Bad?
I have to admit that we've had so many. I haven't used this one, so I don't have a strong opinion about it. But I will say that a lot of us have really gone down to like OWC for almost all of our stuff, and maybe I've had enough trouble with cow digits that I don't use them, but some people do. And so and a lot of it has to do with the buses getting over. Doing something that we don't expect it to do. So you can't really put mics into it. You can't really put, cameras into it. You can't really, you have all kinds of data transfer problems. And so, I've leaned pretty heavily into the OWC solutions just because they seem to have the least number of issues related to those things and things just not working. So this one may work just fine. But what you want to look for, and the best way to test it is hook up a drive to, take your ports and hook up a hard drive, a web camera, and your mic, and now record something to QuickTime while transferring footage to like take a huge file and move it to that drive that's on that key, and be recording video and audio at the same time, and just see if it breaks up. If it does, then it's probably not enough. You probably don't want that key. I know I can do that with OWC. I know that with most other ones, that stress test is the one that usually kicks them off. Is a big transfer going to a drive with a mic, with a camera, will usually have a USB hub not work well. Next question.
Next question in from Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington. As smartphones replace the point-and-click cameras, what's the future hold? Are we all photographers now?
Go ahead, Nigel.
Old technologies don't tend to die. They just have increasingly narrow use cases to the point where they disappear to most of us. But they're still there somewhere. I think the issue is not that we're all going to be photographers, but we're all going to be subjects. And as one of my old bosses used to say, you have no privacy, get over it. I think that is the much bigger issue for us, is not the technology, but what we become within that new technology.
Go ahead, Bill.
I think Nigel's right about that. Plus the fact that, widespread distribution of typewriters did not make everybody a writer. It is not the tool usually, but young people having access to this technology widely does, I think, mean that there is a chance for more better photography, because those who are interested can develop their talent. You don't have to work so hard and make these big investments you used to have to make. I mean, a good smartphone is still a big investment, but most people are going to do that as a core technology in their lives. So I still think, in all those photos I took, I had to think about how to take them and why, and figure out the angles that would work. It took me days here, and it's taken me years to get to that point where I was getting results that are even reasonably satisfying to me. I don't think that'll ever change.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I think there's a huge difference between a photograph and a snapshot. And yeah, if we all have cameras with us, we can all take snapshots.
Yeah, go ahead.
Not many people are taking photographs, though.
Olivier?
Yeah, there is a saying which goes like, the best camera is the one you have with you. And I was in Bangkok yesterday, and so I was with people, and they wanted to visit a few things, and I had my Blackmagic pocket camera to do some filming. But in the afternoon, I left it at the hotel, and I just kept my iPhone with me, and really it's the best camera that you have is the one which is going to make you the photographer at that point.
Yeah. And I think that now, again, if you practice, with intention, you can become a great photographer with an iPhone. Like it is. I just gave my daughter an older iPhone 12, and she had an iPhone 6. And as soon as she started sending photos to me, I was angry that I did not give her one earlier, because she's capturing the whole world around her and she's very prolific when it comes to photos. And suddenly you just saw it snap. And I don't think she'll ever go back to. She has a Canon SLR, and she's 13 or whatever, and I got her an SLR, and so I don't think she'll ever go out with it again, because I can't. When she sends me the photos, I have a hard time telling the difference now between the two. It's incredible. Next question.
Chris Sabato from Albany, Oregon. Can you explain the difference between LED light panels and monolights? Why might you choose one over the other?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, typically when you're talking about a monolight, that was more in the strobe world, where you're looking at these lights that have one continuous light that's meant more what we would call a modeling light. So you're setting up your shot and seeing how it's going to fall. But typically these are a hard, straight light with no diffusion. You would add diffusion by adding like an umbrella or some kind of softbox or something like that. And then the panel lights are more like, these ones that you see where there's diffusion on the front, or you'll see all the LEDs. You'll see each and every single one, and you still will want to diffuse the ones that have some kind of, depending on how far away you are, you'll want to diffuse them, because anytime you add diffusion, you're going to knock down the light. So basically, you're talking about a hard source versus a soft source, and you could have LED panels be hard sources if you don't diffuse them. So when you're talking the term monolight, that's typically a photography term, and it's not a continuous lighting term unless you're using the modeling light on it, which is very dim. And then the monolights will have typically a sync port for you to pop a flash. So when you hit it on your DSLR, your mirrorless, it'll pop or trigger, or use a wireless slave master combination to fire off those units.
Next question.
Olivier Rouchard from Saigon, Vietnam. About 20 years ago, Alex was a guest on Call for Help show with Leo Laporte. It was a Photoshop tutorial on creating a cast iron 3D effect of the show's logo with lighting filters of Photoshop. Where can I find this video?
The funny thing is you can't actually do it anymore because Photoshop took the lighting tool out of Photoshop. I'm so mad. So anyway, so I went to rebuild it a little while ago, and I couldn't because the last version now doesn't have it in it. So you have to go back to an older one. I don't know where that video is, but I was literally going to rebuild it because it's a fun little video, and I was going to build it as we start building stuff for office hours. But yeah, I can't because there's no tool to do it. Next question.
Ike Potter from Hanover, Germany. Is it possible for your magicians in Zoom to automatically transfer all human after-hours attendees right before the office hour pre-show to office hours attendees instead of being kicked out of after-hours?
We are like very, very close to moving. so just stay tuned. So we're, I just have to, my COVID thing slowed things down a little bit, but within the next week or two, we will be over to the always in after hours, and then you won't be kicked out. We'll just move through it. But definitely in the next couple of weeks, we'll have that done. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael, in an article about the future of work, and there's a big link there to it, it says 67% of managers consider remote workers more easily replaceable. How can remote workers make themselves visible?
Be in communication, execute what you said you're going to do by the time you executed it, show up for meetings on time. Those are, and have a good presence when you're in a meeting. Like, when you have it kind of, you're a shadow and there's a background behind you and it looks bad. It really undermines who you are to your manager. When you look like a lot of us look here, it definitely changes the way you occur for a lot of people. And again, being on time, responding to emails very quickly, getting things done, those are the kind of things that you need to do to make that work. Next question.
Kenneth Jones in Seattle, Washington, talking about archiving. A recent question on After Hours had to do with archiving audio discs, vinyl. Should the RIAA playback EQ be done in hardware or in software, or perhaps not at all?
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Well, you usually have a preamp curve that's created by the RIAA that basically favors vinyl playback. So you really kind of want to do it in hardware because you don't want to monkey with it. It's a set EQ curve, and it just needs to be the way it is. So I would any preamp that you would put on a turntable probably already has meaning phono preamp already has that curve in it, and you might want to tweak it a little bit perhaps, but I would not do it in software.
Next question.
Next question from Chris Reidner in Lafayette, Indiana. Interesting video. Would this fit into the mic testing Alex was doing?
So this video has actually it's kind of funny. It's someone who's taken apart a Behringer handheld mic and put it into an enclosure that's very similar to an SM7B, and then comparing them. And it's hard to tell. I mean, I think we should absolutely do it. I just have to figure out I have to figure out what it'll take for us to model it and so on and so forth. I think us testing it would be much more useful than the person testing it that's testing it, because here's the problem. He doesn't show any difference between the mics, and that, like, there's no change in it. And I have a hard time believing that that's actually what's happening. So, I think that us testing it would definitely make sense. And I think that it'll be interesting to play with. Go ahead, Mitchell. Real quick.
He's a very interesting individual, Caleb Pine, DSLR video shooter, and he does a lot of modifications to different things. So I tend to believe what he's doing.
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
It's amazing. He's just taking a SM58.
Well, it's amazing on video.
Stripping it out and putting it in a thing that looks like my,
I watch too much TikTok, so I don't trust anything anymore. Like, anybody shows me a test, I'm like, we'll see. We need to test it to believe it. I'm sure that it very well could be. I just until we actually see it. The fact that there was almost no change between any of these just had all of my red flags start swinging. So I have to, and maybe it is that close, but it seemed very odd to have that be the case. Next question.
Michael Fosbein from Woodstock, Georgia. Forgive my ignorance, but when live streaming from a remote location, since Wi-Fi is unreliable and an Ethernet connection is not possible, how do you connect to the internet?
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, the one that I use that I carry with me all the time is this Nighthawk M1. Also, I carry around my iPad Pro with cellular, but I see a lot of people that have these. Then also there's the PEP Waves and the PEP Links, and Teradek also has some options that are for internet only. And then, of course, there's Starlink, and so those are some of the options.
Go ahead, Mitchell.
Yeah, broadcasters usually use cellular network, and they bond cellular channels together, so they get like 2, maybe 3 phones together to get that bandwidth that they need for broadcast video.
And most broadcasters actually satellite truck, but streamers use the bonded stuff. So anyway, next question. Oh, and not a next question. We are now changing subjects, and so this all the beginning of this happened because Olivier Rouchard was on after hours talking about all the things that they have to prepare for. He and for flight. And I was like, there's so many parallels between what he's talking about and what we do that we should definitely have him come on and maybe learn some things from Olivier. Olivier, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, I'm in Vietnam. I live in Vietnam, and I'm an airline pilot. I'm an instructor. So I instruct pilots to fly mainly the Airbus fleet. I'm specialized in the A320, which is the smallest one, the single aisle. Goes from 150 people to 235 people. And also the biggest one, the A380, which goes up to 585 people. So these are the two aircraft I mainly teach on. And I started doing during COVID, and even before COVID, I started doing little production online Zoom training because it's much more effective, as you know, to give some training online. And I started to be interested in what I was doing technically, and I found that there was a lot of similarities between what I'm doing on a daily basis and what you are doing on a daily basis. And by watching the media, by watching the TV, by listening at people, we can see we don't see when everything goes right. We always see when something goes wrong. And sometimes when you are in my field of work and what you do is by essence dangerous, yet aviation is the safest mode of transportation in the world. After elevators are safer than airline.
I never thought about that. For all those people, folks that are afraid of elevators, just note that the elevators are the safest way to travel.
Where do escalators come in?
Yeah, escalators.
Escalators.
I don't know. I think elevators are probably safer than escalators. I've seen a lot of people fall down escalators.
Yeah, that's true.
Go ahead, Olivier.
That's true, and it became very safe. And some of the reason is because there's been procedure written and there's been routine in place and what we call actions flow, where you don't necessarily take a checklist to do the items, but you do the items in such a way which makes sense, and then you call your reptilian part of the brain to really flash this into your reptilian brain for that aircraft, for that section, for that very specific task that you're doing. And then after that, to call a checklist on top of it will sound right if it's done the proper way. And if you haven't done the proper way, all of a sudden it will come back.
When you talk about the reptilian brain, what you're really saying is that we're going to practice things over and over and over again until we drive them into a habit that you're not thinking about anymore. And what sometimes when we're doing training, we talk about that, moving that from your head to your fingers, where your fingers just do it and your head doesn't know how to do it. So you're handling some stuff with repetition and some things with checklists. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So you're doing a series of action, and then after that, by calling the checklist and calling the items, your brain recalls the series of actions that you've been doing before. And either it sounds standard and then you move on, or it sounds unstandard. And non-standard doesn't mean bad. You can be in places where it's not standard, and you have to make a deviation from the routine. But it just lights up a light in your brain and says, "Is my deviation all right or not?" So for that, I'd like to show you a quick example. We have varieties of tools today, and I will show you softwares which are specialized in our daily routines. So when you walk into a cockpit, Well, you find yourself with something that looks like this. And so you have captain sitting here on the left side and the first officer sitting here on the right, or maybe the instructor sitting on the right. And then you start preparing all your buttons. And on the Airbus, you start with the top part. And you put all those buttons and those knobs in the position they should be. That's the first thing that you know. And you go through your fire test drills, you go through your battery tests, through your hydraulic system check, air conditioning systems. Is it too hot? Is it too cold? Do you have to put the APU on, and so on and so forth? And these, you don't do it out of checklists. But later on, when you've done with all those check, and it's about 20 minutes later, then you will move into another document which is called the checklist. And what I've just done here, you find it on the checklist called before start checklist, for example. And that entire flow, which happened on the overhead panel, and then goes into the central pedestal, and then goes into your instrument check, as well as what we call the FCU, flight control unit, which is the center right there, is all summarized into that one line that you can see here, called on top here, called cockpit preparation.
And so you're, as a pilot, you're expected to know that as second nature. Like you've done it and been tested and run it, and
exactly. And then you lift your eyes up to the overhead panel, and you quickly scan around you, and something is going to tell you if you did it right or not. And all of a sudden, it is the pilot. A flight is always divided into two roles of pilots. You have the pilot flying, the guy who's going to fly the plane, and you have the pilot monitoring, the person who will do everything else. Communication, configuration of the aircraft, landing gear, flaps, as well as loading maps. And so the pilot monitoring does a lot of things. And every flight, you switch the roles. Whether you're first officer or captain, doesn't matter. One flight, you're pilot flying, the other flight, you're pilot monitoring. So the pilot monitoring, we put out the checklist.
And just as a question, and that is I believe that's partially to give people a little bit of a break, but also to make sure that nobody gets old at doing it, right? Like that no one forgets something by switching back and forth. The first pilot, you always know, is familiar with the plane and with all the checklists as well. And the pilot,
exactly.
no one gets rusty.
No one gets rusty, and exactly, it's a matter of recency. So everybody stay recent in the action. So right now we are working with an electronic checklist, as you see, but we had up to not too long ago, and we still have it today, those type of checklists. This is a training that I did for Scandinavian Airline Systems, when was it? A couple of months ago in Denmark. So we have those checklists, and these are paper checklists. So you can use them on the iPad, or you can find them in the cockpit. Let me go back in my super source right there, on the sleeve right next to you. You see this little rail right there?
That checklist is always in that little sleeve, right? Somebody comes in and makes sure. Yep.
That checklist is always on that little sleeve. Your pen is always in that little hole.
That's great.
And that's the Airbus. On the Boeing, which I love, by the way, for our friends in Seattle, it's always here. There is a small here. I don't know if you see. There is a small. The Boeing would have a small box in which you slide your checklist. So you can always find this type of material of equipment where you expect it to find your pen, your checklists, and most everything. So you have all these action flows, which happens at very specific sequence, and everything is then double check with the checklists. So you use your thumb to go through the paper checklist, or you just touch it. So cockpit preparation, and you can see at the end of the line it's called complete. But both pilots have to say complete at the same time. You can see complete, and I just touch it, and it goes into checked. Gear pins and covers. These are the little push pins which lock the gears on the ground, which you have to remove when you go flying. Usually there's a big fly dangling down, so you cannot miss it. And you have to make sure that these are inside the aircraft. If they're inside the aircraft, they're not outside. So you have a panel just behind you, and you just check the panel, and you check them. They're here. I can see them. So gear
and
pins
these are the ones
and covers.
These are the ones that have the big red thing that says "remove before flight."
Exactly, remove before flight.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you can see them. So you go through all those little lines, and if, for example, right now, for some reason, the refueling of the aircraft is not finished, you can skip it, no problem. But then you can go to takeoff data. So you just double check the performance that you use for takeoff, and that means the center of gravity of the aircraft, if it's within parameters, and the speeds. And if you want, I can give you a short demo about the speeds later on. So this is a course I did for a local airline here in Vietnam called Bamboo Airways, and the differential between the A319, A320, A321, which are similar aircraft, but just segments of the fuselage has been added up or removed. So the scale 1 aircraft is the A320, and A319 you remove a piece of the fuselage so to make it smaller, and the 321 you add 1 or 2 segments of the fuselage to make it longer. It's a shortcut. So you know by heart the center of gravity envelope, which you can see here. And
this is sometimes when people are when we're on a plane and someone says we need some people to move to the back or some people to move around. This is working on this process, right?
That's usually it's the case on smaller aircraft, not
right.
Too much on this one, but yes, you're right, it's exactly this. So now I've just kept the fuel quantity, but I'm taking care of the takeoff data. So I know I have an item remaining. Now I'm continuing with the checklist. So check windows and doors. Is the beacon on? Thrust levers idle, because we don't want to start the engines with some thrust on the thrust levers, and parking brake as required. And then all of a sudden you create a checklist complete. So you have a big button down there, checklist complete. Well, what's happening right now? Now something is going wrong. You can see on my checklist application that I have a little segment with a camembert cheese or apple pie in green and blue. So what does it mean? It means that the checklist is not complete. So before you move on into the next step, it allows you to return to the checklist and to see what has been forgotten.
And part of that is also like, so in this case, you once you've started the engines, you don't want to add fuel. So you really have to figure out what the fuel quantity is. Does that mean that?
Or maybe, no, certainly the fuel truck is gone. You have your fuel receipt from the fuel company, from the ramp agents. You have all your papers in the cockpit, but you just didn't do the action on the checklist.
Got it. Mm-hmm.
And so there is a reason why you can skip a checklist, but it's got to be done at some point. And if you break a checklist, you have to redo it from the beginning. So now I'm back onto my page with the checklist, and I can click on it as much as I can. I cannot do it anymore. This is locked. So what do I have to do? I need to reset my checklist. Confirm you want to reset the before start checklist? Yes, I want to confirm. And then I need to start all over again the checklist. It has to be done all over again.
In that order.
In that order. So we're starting again.
So while you can skip it, you shouldn't. It's just like it takes all the fun out of it if you.
you have to make sure that before you complete the checklist, you click the button, checklist complete, all the items have been checked.
Got it.
Now everything is done, and my before start checklist is completely closed. I can move into the next one. So it's really a defense mechanism to make sure that all the items have been complete before you move into the next step. Right. Because your reptilian brain can be tricked as well. All of a sudden, you think you've done an action, but the cabin crew is coming here to bring you your coffee, or the mechanics is coming to tell you that the hydraulic door behind has just been locked in a special way, and the dispatcher is telling you that 3 passengers are not coming and they need to disembark the luggage. So all of a sudden, your brain think that you've done it, but in reality, you've not done the action.
Right.
And that, at certain level, can have consequences.
Yeah. Yeah. Just with all the distractions and everything else, that you have to have something that's holding you to the ground.
Exactly. So now I was talking about the action flows, and I showed you this graphic about the cockpit, and everything which is there is visible on the SOP, so standard operating procedure. So before you get even into the aircraft, you've got the safety exterior inspections. So what do you have? You have 2 columns. One is PF, pilot flying, and the other one is PM, pilot monitoring. Wheels, chock. Do I have my blocks around the wheels? Yes. The landing gear doors, are there closed or open? Maybe sometime they can work on the hydraulic and the doors are open. As soon as you power the aircraft, the hydraulic comes in. Those doors are so powerful that they can cut a human body in two. So you have to make sure there is no mechanics in the bay when you actually power the aircraft on, because something is going to happen. And these items, we call that the blood ink, because they exist, because those type of accidents have happened.
Right.
So these are the types of things that we're paying attention to, because it's really a matter of death of life, which is not very often the case in audio production. If you have a glitch, you have a glitch. Someone may smile, someone may be upset, but most of the time, it's very unlikely that you need to call a widow. So, the APU area, is it clear? And we have to make sure it's clear. The APU is the auxiliary power unit, which is in the back of the aircraft. It's in the tail of the aircraft. It's on the very back. It's where is it? Can I draw on it? No, it's the back cone of the aircraft. It's a mini turbine and supplies the aircraft on the ground with air conditioning and electricity and hydraulic power. So that mini turbine is very important. And the reason why you want to make sure it's clear, if you have your fuel truck behind and you turn on this turbine, it could be hazardous. So these are things that you have to do. And you're not even in the aircraft when you do it. So you go back to your safety exterior inspection, and then you do your preliminary flows, what we call the flow. And that is an action flow. And you can see it. We did it by memory, but everything is depicted into the SOP. So right now, everything that we're talking about is just standard operating procedures. It is standard normal procedure. There's nothing going wrong. There is nothing abnormal about what we do. Now, things can go sometime wrong, and they're not necessarily bad, but you need to react to it, and there's something that you have to do. So all those standard operating procedures with all those checklists, this is our daily routine. This is another day at the office. This is business as usual. This is what you've been trained on. Now, you cannot, there are hundreds of actions. If you go through the SOPs and you look at all these actions, we're talking about hundreds or even thousands of actions, small actions, done one after the other in sequence.
And this happens every
by
time.
heart.
Every time a plane takes off, these are being checked.
These are being done, and these are being checked.
Because I was thinking about it,
thousands of items.
I was really thinking about this before the show. You know, as I was getting ready this morning, and just thinking about how few times planes come out of the sky. You know, like it does happen, but it is so rare because of all these checklists, right?
It is very rare, and because of all the systems and all the procedures that are going on, and you must understand that most of the incidents or most of the accidents happen in aviation. Everybody walks out alive. Most of the time, the fatal accidents in aviation are minuscule compared to everything which is happening.
Right.
We have a joke which says a good landing is when everybody walks out of the aircraft. An excellent landing is when we can use the aircraft again. So
that's good.
So now we have, let's imagine an abnormal checklist, and we have what we call an ECAM, and which is an electronic central aircraft monitoring system. And I had a question the other day by someone asking if we could incorporate an ECAM model into our Blackmagic systems. And I thought about that, and I was like, no, unfortunately, it's not going to be possible. So the ECAM here, basically these are ECAM, the upper ECAM and the lower ECAM are two screens which gives us the status of the system of the aircraft. Now, when something goes wrong, we need a checklist to operate those procedures, those abnormal procedures. And the ECAM right here comes into play. And the ECAM is basically monitoring the entire aircraft. As I was saying, an A320, and it's the same with a Boeing 737, is about 50 computers. The 320 is 52 computers. The 380 is a little less, it's 37 computers. But they all talk to one another. And we have different level of safety. We have fail operational, fail safe, fail passive, and then we have all the other abnormal level. So let's say we have computer A, B, and C, and computer B fails. There is a failure on computer B, and computer B have feature 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Computer A will say, okay, computer B failed, I can take feature 1, 2, and 4. And the one next to it, computer C, will say, okay, I can take over feature 3 and 5. For us, the pilots, it's completely transparent. But we have to acknowledge it. We have to know what happened. Because if another failure will cascade on top of it, then we might start losing capabilities. We might have a degraded aircraft later on the chain.
Or the aircraft may want to pull down. right. I mean, wasn't that the issue with the Boeing?
Like the MCAS, and that's sadly it's an example which is a direct consequence.
Because it doesn't have it didn't have the same redundancy, right?
It did have the same redundancy, but the redundancies were chained together. Right. So when one failed, the other one failed as well.
Right.
So I remember the interview of one of Boeing's executive on front of the Congress, and the poor guy was executed because he was on front of very talented politicians who were asking the questions, and one of them was saying, when I buy this system was optional, why is it optional in Boeing when it comes to security? When I buy a car, my seatbelt is not optional. And my answer in my head was like, in aviation, we're way beyond this. We're not talking about one seatbelt. We're talking about 3 seatbelts, and the 4th one is optional. If you understand what I mean. Right. So coming back to the checklist, all the computers right there will organize the failures by level of importance, and we'll put the checklist of the appropriate system on top of the other. So, and it's amazing. It's really it saves lives on a daily routine.
How often,
because
how often do
emergencies
things go wrong? Like
daily.
how often do those alarms daily? Like
You have-
something
we
going wrong
have-
on the plane all the time.
We have emergencies happening daily in the sky, and you never hear about them. And most of people don't even know about it. And honestly, it is complete routine. A failure is
But
not a
because of these
problem.
checklists, it's not, when something goes wrong, there's training for it, there's checklists for it, there's second computers for that, there's backups to the backups to the backups.
There is redundancy. There are flows, and there is a system which has been already thought before you. So the thing is, and the advantage that we have in aviation, an Airbus or a Boeing, is one holistic entity which works together and which has been put together by the manufacturers. You might not have the same engines. One can be a CFM engine, a Socata engine, General Electric, or Rolls-Royce engine in a 320 or in a 737. And the avionics that you can have Honeywell, you can have Sagem, or you can have, what's the third big one? Doesn't matter. The boxes are the same. They look the same, and the specifications are the same. The interface is very much the same, but what's happening inside is very different. However, the way it is wired together is extremely homogeneous. Now, when you audiovisual people are called for a job, your system is not holistic. You're taking a Blackmagic or what is it, Grass Valley video switcher,
Yep.
and then you're putting your Tascam mixers, and you're taking your different brands of mics. And if you have to do something on the web, you will take a web presenter and a second web presenter. Now, if the eCam would exist, it would be very nice to have a screen on top of your video mixer, which will give you the state of every single piece of equipment that you have, talking to your Tascam mixer, to whatever mics you have, to your nanolights, and even to the air conditioning system in the room, or to the web presenter. So let's say that I have an engine failure on takeoff, which sounds bad, and it's not that bad. I tell you, it's not that bad. We have another one. Those aircrafts are overpowered. It's made for that. We can take off maximum takeoff weight with one engine, with 50% of the engines on. It is not a comfortable. It is a highly abnormal situation, but it's something which we can easily deal with. Now, you have your web presenters, and I'm just thinking of something which is broadcast, which you would send to YouTube. So you have your main server and your secondary server when you're doing a YouTube stream. So you would have your web presenter sending one stream to the main one, and the second one, another web presenter sending another stream to the secondary server. Now, let's imagine that for some reason, and you have a different internet service provider in using each web presenter, and you would have 2 G5 cell phones on each one of them, and you would have a computer with, I'm using the service, the internet bounding service I'm using is Speedify. So here I have 2 fiber internet connection to my apartment, and I'm using right now 2 iPhones, which are simultaneously. I have 4 streams. I have 4 streams from my house to this presentation today. So now you have, let's say, failure from one supplier, and all of a sudden you would have a message coming to your box saying web presenter 1 fault. So you identify it. The good idea would be to have the operator, the guy doing having the fingers on it, not being the one deciding on the procedure. It's to have the director sitting behind and saying, okay, web presenter 1, fault. Okay, web presenter 1, web presenter 2, check. How is my web presenter 2? Stream is fine. It's streaming strong. I can see that on my monitor. I've got so much bandwidth. My phones are fine. Okay. Web presenter 1, shut down. You go down behind, you pull the plug. Check internet line from the web presenter. So now you would go to your router of the web presenter 1 which fell, and you would check, is it a problem from the web presenter or from the router? Now you identify, can I reboot my web presenter 1, or is it a catastrophic failure? So now you're analyzing yourself. Yes, I can reboot it. Shut down router, reset router. And that is in the checklist. And you're ordering, the director of your production is ordering the technician, the guy manipulating. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you, in an aircraft, very often, when the captain would take over, the captain doesn't take over. The guy in charge of the flight doesn't take over. The captain needs to step back and to actually be able to think. So your first priority is to fly the airplane. The second is to navigate, and the third is to communicate. And it's got to be done in that order. Avionate, navigate, communicate. Fly, know where you're going, tell what you're doing, in this order. So you want to give the workload to the other guy. Say, you have the aircraft. You give it to the first officer, and the first officer is going to fly the aircraft, is going to remain, is going to stay with an aircraft stable, wings level, in a steady climb, at good power setting, and actually making sure that we don't hit radio towers, and we're staying clear from the buildings, and we're staying clear from the terrains, and we're flying towards the sea where we know we don't have any obstacles. And then we can do whatever we want. That is his role. So your technician would be to actually make sure that your production is stable, right, and how much degradation you would put into it. Well, and then again, you can start, start rebooting everything.
And this is one of the things that we talk about is when you have one person doing too many things. So when the team is understaffed, you end up what we call a cascading failure, which is that a person with two roles has one role fail. They go pay attention to that role, and this role fails, and then that puts pressure. And what happens is it just starts to snowball, down that path. And that's oftentimes why we push pretty hard to have a lot of individual. Like I have an event this weekend, and I have an A1, that's going to manage those things, but I also have two A2s. One's managing comms, one's managing the wireless, one's, and so that each one of them has their own roles that are going to make that all happen. But there's one person that's, to your point, that's overseeing all of that, but different people handling different parts of that individual thing. And the reality is both of those A2s could swap if they needed to. Like they know both systems well.
Exactly. What you want is to avoid what we call the tunneling effect. So you don't see the other problems on your side. You're focusing on one problem, and you don't see what's coming on the side.
Right.
That was an evidence for the crash of Air France 377 Rio Paris. I don't know if you remember. It disappeared on the Atlantic Ocean, where all the pitot-static.
This is from South America, from Argentina. Is it Argentina? Was it?
From Rio. They were coming back from Rio, and they lost instrumentation. And it's a problem which they could have solved very easily, saving the life of 335 people. And they had a fall of 40,000 feet, and it was a painful 4 minutes and 20 seconds for everybody. And that could have been avoided with the current procedures that we have in place, and with what we learned from that crash. It is not possible that will happen today again. So
yeah, and that's the key is to learn from those things. So every one of that's why like all that data, the black box and all the data is so important, is to make sure that we don't make the same mistake twice.
And I remember you, Alex, when you saw this presentation or this little thing that I did on After Hour, and you were like, "Can you show it?" And my first reaction was like, I work in aviation. We show everything.
Right. Right.
We don't disclose anything. We show everything.
Right.
And when we do something wrong, and we are in a non-punitive industry, when we do something wrong, we say it. We can write our own report against ourselves. Right. Not against, but just reporting, saying, this is what happened. This is the concept. This is what I saw. This is what I did.
Yeah,
and these are the consequences.
And there's a saying that to know the truth, you can neither be for nor against it. Like it has to just be what it is. And I know that the team is working well on my end when people say, "Well, this is what I did," and that comes from the very if everyone says, "I could have done this better. I could have done this better. I could have not. That's what this person should have done, or this piece of machinery broke down, but I could have been more this. I could have been more that." That's when you know that you have a team that feels safe to talk about those things. Hey, we're going to run out of time. We've got a bunch of questions. Do you have any last things before we jump into the questions that you want to talk about?
Just 2 minutes. It's about briefing before the action. I just want to show you something which is going to take exactly 1 minute. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to jump into my cruising software. And you can see that tab, that blue tab that I have selected. It's called Descent One Engine Inoperative. So you're flying in cruise, and all of a sudden you're losing an engine. Remember, I have 2 engines on that aircraft, not 4, but I'm losing one. So here, the first thing that I do as soon as I'm on cruise is to dig out my application. I have 1 engine inop, and I've got some mountains below me. We're crossing the Rockies. We took off from California. We're going to the East Coast. I've got a headwind of 12 knots. The temperature, it's summer, so I am 12 Celsius degrees. And by the way, the international standard in aviation is Celsius temperature. So even in America, we're only talking about Celsius. And we're talking about feet and nautical miles. So these are units. Anti-ice is off. Air conditioning is standard off. My weight right now, and we are talking about metric tons. I'm a little less than this. I've just burned 5 tons, so I'm 68 tons. My CG is around 20. No, let's keep it at 3.3. It's okay. Obstacle standards, initial altitude, we're flying at 36,000 feet. And we're going to fly at what we call the green speed is the optimal, this is the best performance of the aircraft. Speed brakes are retracted. And we have a fuel factor penalty of 2% on that engine. This engine is old and is burning about 2% more fuel as a new engine. So let's compute. And all of a sudden, I've got this table showing up. So we can see that I'm starting at 36,000 feet. And within a distance of about 160 miles, I'll be descending to my maximum altitude that I can maintain with my aircraft, which is about 23,000 feet. So I'm assessing this strategy already when I'm in cruise. And I'm briefing my other pilots. I said, I'm pilot flying. Now, if I have an engine failure, Mach thrust, pull heading, reduce speed, green dot speed, select flight level 252, so 25,200 feet. And this is going to be my action. Since we are on an airway and we have aircraft on the front and on the back of us, I'm going to deviate 45 degrees to the right or to the left, depending on the terrain that I have. So, and that's your brief. And that is already your briefing. That is what you're going to do, and the other one understands this. So if the problem happens, this is what's going to happen before we even start any other checklists.
Right.
So this is what I wanted to show you.
That's great. That's great. And again, it comes from a lot of training, a lot of practice, a lot of, and that's the, I think that when we talk about, especially as we start doing more and more of the systems that we use in office hours, people say, well, I did the edit, right? Like I did it once,
Yeah.
I did it 5 times, I did it 10 times. And for a lot of these things, it's, have you done it 100 times? Have you done it 50 times? And you have software, you have simulators, and then the fact that you have the pilots going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth is, there is something about getting the routine where you're not trying to figure it out. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff, as you said, that reptilian brain, getting a whole bunch of things that just happen, that will happen automatically. And then you think you still have things that you have to think about, but there's a whole bunch of stuff you don't have to process in the heat of the moment to figure that out. The routine. Yeah, it's really, really fascinating. Go ahead, Mitchell. Did you have a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a point that we have similarities in running this program. For example, if for some reason I had an unintended reason that I have to leave the position as reader, there's a method, and the analogy is keep flying the plane. So the flying the plane is keep the show on the air and don't make any changes. It would switch to Bill in this particular case, and there would be some communication in the back end so they know what to do on their end. Well, right. It actually happened, and it did it smoothly, and I'm kind of proud that we have similar checklists and similar redundancies to make us be able to do and keep flying the plane too.
Let's go to
to reply to your point. Now you have to decide how much degradation you can have. Us in aviation, we don't have a choice. We cannot stop the show. We cannot put a slide on front of the screen due to technical reasons.
Those are bad.
We'll get back to you later. No, we don't have a pause button. Mm-hmm. So as long as I have an aircraft with 2 wings, some flight controls, even without electricity, and we're talking about fly-by-wire aircraft, I have mechanical backup. I can glide the plane down.
Right.
So that's as far as I can degrade it. Now, talking to your show, how far can you go? Can you do your PowerPoint? Can you keep your PowerPoint presentation in that? Being able to still play it in Zoom, using only your webcam and your and your headset with a microphone and your cell phone as the communication to the outside. So with all your M1 minis, Isadora, and all those Office Hour 2.1, how far can you go before it's game over? Yeah. That's the kind of things you have to assess.
And you have to think about it ahead of time. And a lot of times it's just doing it over and over again. You start seeing what those things are and what we have to have backups for. I stole it from a movie, but we oftentimes say, when did Noah build the ark? Before the rain, so you have to think about those things a little bit ahead of time. All right, let's go to the next question.
Kenneth Jones from Seattle, Washington. Using checklist is a great memory aid, but how do you discipline yourself to do it before you check it?
Did you have anything you want to add, Ken?
Yeah, my biggest problem is myself. I don't have another me to say, well, you didn't do that. You put the mark there, but you didn't do it. It was under the desk, and you didn't want to get down there and pick up that cord at that instant. And so you checked it. And then when you got to the venue, you remembered, I should have done that. So I am my own worst enemy.
Go ahead, Olivier.
On the training, if we skip a checklist, or if we're flying on a check ride, meaning we are in the airplane and we have a check pilot behind us, grading us and releasing us for the line, we skip a checklist, we can lose our job. As simple as that.
Yeah. Next question.
Next question from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, California. Perhaps some panelists can walk us through their own system checks quickly before joining office hours each day.
I think we're just because we're going to run out of time here. We're just going to keep it going with questions for Olivier right now. But we can have another conversation about checklists. This is good. Next question.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA. Paper and pencil versus digital checklist. What are the pros and cons of each? Can you see future tech enhancing these processes? For example, virtual reality implementations of procedures or other clever usage of screens.
Go ahead.
I've just shown you this, the SAS checklist, which you leave in the slots next to you. That works super well on the Boeing Dreamliner, the 787, on the Airbus A380, A350. If you don't do the electronic checklist, which are on the aircraft, it's not on the iPad, it's on the aircraft, you cannot jump into the next phase. The aircraft will not let you go through the next phase. Right. If you don't have both engine running, you cannot have a before takeoff checklist. Or four engines, depending on what type of aircraft you have. Yeah. So paper and pen is very nice because you don't have to activate anything. You just put it out and read it. Before start checklist, parking brakes, checklist complete.
And I have to say, in larger shows that we've had, we have literally digital checklists across many teams. And as they start to hit them, we start to see green across it. And we start to see, like, if there's like 20 rooms, they're all doing their checklist and it's all in real time. I'm seeing this room's green, this one's green, this one's green, this one's green. And I would never be able to do that with paper.
I see so many similarities in our industries and what you do.
Yeah. No, next question.
Douglas Carmichael, can the same structure carry over into communications processes? For example, go, no-go, poll before show start, X for Y on ZPL for initiating call, etc.
I think NASA did it very well during the Apollo missions, and they're still, to some point, they're still doing it today with SpaceX. Yeah. It's a little bit more electronic in a way. There is no go, no-go. Now they're just activating the next phase, which goes into a central control unit. But it's exactly the same thing. Now you can having all your technicians with a headset and a microphone and an intercom and having all them confirming we're good to go, like what we do in here in office hour before the show when we have Unicom and we have our back office technician asking us, can you hear us? And we all go thumbs up. It's exactly the same thing.
The next question. Yeah, absolutely.
Josh Kaufman from Pittsburgh, PA. Are there some non-deterministic behavior that must account for specifically for daily pilot situations? How would the checklist handle potential necessity of forks and procedures where there is more than a single correct procedural path?
Doesn't happen too often. And in here, or let me go back to Okay,
I think the flight that landed in the Hudson is a good example of a pilot just needing to make a decision, right? Like it's like,
or QA32, which was the very famous Singapore Sydney flight with the A380 from Qantas, where, I don't know if you heard about it, there was an engine explosion which actually destroyed part of the wings, most of the hydraulic system of the aircraft, punctured the fuselage of the aircraft, and cut down several layers of electrical systems. So we are trained in the simulator to handle 1, 2 emergencies at the same time. 3, if the instructor is a very bad mood and wants to fail us, or if he's a friend and is doing to us a bad joke. They had 67.
Wow.
So at some point, they were like, okay, stop reading the failures. The captain stepped back, gave the controls to his first officer, and start assessing, what do I have? The weather is fine. I have fuel, which is leaking out. We're going to quick run out of fuel. We're going to have an unbalanced aircraft because we have one wing which is punctured, and the fuel is leaking out of there like crazy. And I'm losing 100 tons per hour. And but I have a flight. I have an airplane which I can fly. I have a weather which I can see, and I have a runway which I can use. And they managed to land it. Now in Oshkosh, which is happening right now, 10 years ago, I saw a presentation of the first officer of the Hudson River catastrophe doing a presentation, and he was very, very honest. He said one of the great things that we had is we had no choice, and it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon, perfect visibility, perfect weather over one of the most densely populated area in the world, and we only had one place to land. Right. So the decision was taken immediately. Once the decision was taken, 80% of the action was already taken. And 80% of the fact that everybody walked out alive was already done.
Right.
Because the decision was there. If the same thing would have happened over Siberia, by minus 40 degrees outside, by night, in bad weather, full of forest and lakes, that would have been a completely different story.
Oh, interesting. Next question.
Chris Clark from Tempe, Arizona. Commercial airline crews are under some time pressure when executing pre-flight checklists. How is this possible source of error mitigated?
When there's a lack of when there's a lack of communication, and it's very much sometime a Western Eastern culture. There is no the gradient between a first officer and a captain in a Western mind cockpit with Western people. The gradient is not that much. The captain basically takes the final decision and signs the paperwork. That's his role. In Asia, it's completely different. There's a huge gap. There's a massive gap. And I've already done a briefing with a cadet where I was telling on the cadet on my briefing just to test him. Okay, so here's my approach. Here is what I'm going to do. Here is this. And then on short final to save fuel, I will shut down an engine. I was saying this during my briefing. And I had my Vietnamese young cadet telling me, yes, captain, yes, captain, yes, captain, yes, captain. I could have shut down an engine in flight. He wouldn't have stopped me.
Because he wasn't listening.
He was listening, but I have authority.
Got it.
He wouldn't stop me from doing something stupid like this, which would never happen anywhere in the Western. I tell you, this cadet today is not doing it anymore.
Right.
If I repeat the same briefing to him today, he would tell me, can we be serious now? So it very much relies on this pressure when executing pre-flight checklists before takeoff, and error mitigation really happens between the crew. And this is why having, as you say, A1, A2, people being able to revert the role and knowing exactly what's going on is absolutely essential. Absolutely essential.
And I've flown enough. I mean, I've been on enough planes where I know that it does feel like in most situations they will not take off if there's some little light on or there's something that isn't working. They'll just sit there and wait for it to get looked at and fixed. And they'll oftentimes come on and say, "Well, we got a light on and we think it's fine, but we can't move forward until we have that light."
And it's documented. There's no second guess. If there is a light on, it means something, and if it means something, we look for the information and we have the information.
Yeah. Next question.
Chris Clark again. Ballistic missile submarines use an elaborate multi-person pre-launch checklist. In launch drills, the checklist must be the same as for an actual launch, yet minimize the chance of an unintended or an intended launch. How is this accomplished?
No idea.
But it's hard. And we have the same thing where we try to go through these tests and we just can't quite. You can do almost everything, but if you go live, then everyone's going to see it on the channel. So it's interesting. We oftentimes pull pins on our side so that we can't see, so it can't get out of the building. So then we can do everything we want to do without it actually reaching the world. Next question.
Josh Kaufman, Pittsburgh, PA. What are examples of situations where measurements and lists define procedure versus the judgment of the pilot? What situations require human judgment where automation or pre-scheduled procedures will fall short?
I think every time you're in a situation where the human factors has nothing to do with the machine itself. Yet again, I invite you to watch the movie Sully and with Tom Hanks. It's extremely realistic. It complies exactly with the procedures of US Air at the time. And actually, the actors for that movie practically got a type rating. They spent hundreds of hours, not hundreds of hours, but they spent a lot of hours in the simulator.
Yeah. Next question.
Bill Davis from San Diego. Have you encountered Atul Gawande's The Checklist Manifesto? And if so, what's your opinion of it?
Sorry about that. Human factors.
Yep.
I don't know what that is.
Oh, well, there you go.
Let me just really quickly say. Okay. He's a Harvard, he was the valedictorian of the Harvard graduating class of the medical school, and he's a surgeon, and he is a huge proponent of checklists and wrote this wonderful book called The Checklist Manifesto. And it just extends, I mean, Olivier is in a circumstance where you're responsible for 300 souls, so everything is just perfectly mission critical. Surgeons have a little of that, probably not as much as you have, because it's usually just one patient on the table. But he writes brilliantly about why checklists can be the most critical tool in getting good outcomes in a surgical suite and beyond that.
One of my closest friend was working with me in Emirates when I was flying the 380, and he was my instructor. He retired 3 months ago, and for the past 7 years, he studied to become a doctor. In the same time, he was an airline pilot. And he's a doctor today. He retired at the age of 55. And now he has a very successful consulting medical company in Switzerland, and he's setting up checklists for surgery blocks. That's what he does now.
That's great.
So there's a direct parallel to that. We feed a lot of information to the medical world, and the same way NASA developed the HACCP protocol for handling food hygiene for the astronauts. And food hygiene is applied. HACCP protocol is applied to the aviation as well. You have a flight from Dubai to Los Angeles, 17 hours, and you're flying overhead the North Pole. You're overhead the North Pole. You're 6 hours away from the closest airport at that time. You have a foodborne illness with 600 people on board, and you have 12 toilets. So all those industries are cross-feeding information to one another, and aviation and the medical world is very tied together.
It's interesting. Yeah. Next question.
Mark Giuliani, Washington, D.C. Do you find that every airline has its own checklist, or is there an IATA FAA standard?
No, there is a checklist provided by the manufacturer of the aircraft. And then it's been implemented inside the operation of the airline.
And that checklist is the same for all airlines?
So it is the same for all, but sometimes you have options. For example, you have a button for the cabin crew that tells the cockpit, cabin ready. Right. And sometimes you don't have it. It's an option. You pay more or you pay less. But so there is a code. Sometimes it's the cabin crew giving you a digicode, and it's got a different sound, a different bell, and that's a sign, is the cabin ready or not? And then you and then it's implemented into the checklist.
Next question.
Mark is here again, and he asks, as the navigation of an aircraft becomes more automated, how do pilots use checklists to check the status of the computers? Do pilots have to worry about software updates?
Those checklists that we have here, no, not those checklists, but let me show you something else. Let me go on my super source. Where's my super source? It's right here. And I'm going to my mapping software. Here, I've got a button called Update. And I haven't done, because this iPad is not flying, I haven't done an update for a long time. And it says my data is not current. All database are checked every 23 days, and the cycles are every 23 days. And you can fly with an outdated database of one cycle. And then something else. In the aircraft itself, we have those boxes here. These are our flight computers. And we have a small button here called MCDU menu. And then we have a menu here on the side giving us our accuracy, because we have 2 GPS, we have 3 inertial centrals, and we have radio measuring equipment with antennas on the ground. And it's all combined into 3 computers talking with one another. And those 2 boxes are identical, but on each side, they're identical, but they're independent, and they're talking with one another. And they're assessing an accuracy measures. Am I accurate enough to be able to start flying across an ocean? Am I accurate enough to be able to start doing an approach with no visibility? Mm-hmm. And yes, this is how we assess the accuracy of the aircraft, and it is part of the checklist. Absolutely.
Next question.
Peter Belbin, Houston, Texas. In the example provided, RE and redundancy of connectivity for web streams, shouldn't there also be no dependence on the same stream encoders to reduce the possibility of both being impacted similarly to perhaps different firmware revs?
And I'll just jump in to answer that one really quickly, is that what we generally try to do with our encoders is have complete diversity from the time that the only place that they may share something is a router, and we try to avoid that even. But they basically once they leave that router, they go to two encoders. Those encoders have 2 different power supplies. Those Ethernet cables do not go through the same router. They take 2 different paths through the building, and they go to 2 different CDNs or 2 different internet providers. That's what when we say in our side full diversity, that's what full diversity means, is that they're going to take that signal and go, and the only place that they may share it is the router, and usually the router has a backup. And so that's what we try to do, is we try to get it as far as diverse as possible. There's a place where you start adding so much diversity that you end up reducing stability, so that's what you have to be careful of. Next question.
Craig McFarlane from Boston, Mass. Is there a clear and simple way people can give feedback about missing or unclear checklist items?
I mean, a lot of these have been through. It sounds like, by the time they get yes. to it, they've been trained over and over again, right?
Yes, and when you're doing a checklist and you're not sure about the clearance, you ask confirm.
Right.
So, for example, air traffic control is telling you to climb to 1,000 feet, means 11,000 feet. If you don't understand, you're not asking air traffic control, please confirm 1,000 feet. You ask them, please confirm clearance, and they will repeat it. Right. And in your checklist, for example, this one is the landing checklist. Cabin crew advice, auto thrust, speed, auto brake, well, depending on the situation. ICAM memo, landing, no blue. Meaning those items which are listed below, landing gear, signs, cabin ready, spoilers arm, flap setting in the proper position, all these are under the same action. If you're not comfortable with one, you ask to confirm.
Yeah, that's great. Last question.
Last question from Douglas Carmichael. Mixeffect has a built-in simulator, so users can become familiar with the app without atem hardware. Could you see our industry adopting simulation as a training tool more broadly?
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot, about building simulators for that kind of thing, and it's a huge part of what happens in the aircraft industry, right, Olivier? I mean, you have to have.
This is my ambition. We need, in the next 20 years, we need 600,000 pilots. Airbus and Boeing, they are competitors, so they most of the time disagree on most of the things, but they agree on one thing: they're going to supply about 45,000 aircrafts within the next 20 years.
Right.
and technology is helping us. We're going to have an airspace which is more and more dense. We're going to compact the air traffic more and more. We're going to reduce separation between aircrafts. Airflow will be dealt differently, and this is all about training. And the amount the amount of time in the simulator is crucial.
And we're seeing simulators. Go ahead.
Those simulators are expensive. Huh? An aircraft catalog price of a 737 or an A320 is about $88 million.
For the simulator?
No.
How much is the simulator?
The aircraft. The simulator is about $15 million.
15. So the aircraft is 88 million, but the simulator for the aircraft is 15 million. And that has to be kept up, right?
And that is running 24 hours a day. Right. It's rented 24 hours a day. It is run by racks of server computers because the avionics that you have inside the simulator is the one supplied by the manufacturer.
Right.
So when you are walking into a simulator, it is not a cheesy replica of a cockpit. It is the cockpit supplied by the manufacturer.
Right.
You're flying with this and with the same avionics, which is fed by all those computers. And you need full-time engineers to run those simulators all the time.
And we're seeing, some organizations that are doing or training pilots are, also working with VR now, where before you get to the simulator, you're putting goggles on and you're being able to do a lot of those things and work through them to save simulator time. Like literally,
you're doing your flows.
You can do all the things that you can do, all of those checklists and everything else in VR, and be clicking on those things and or selecting those things. And the idea is that we're going to reduce the amount of time. So once you get to the simulator is something that looks familiar. It works that way, and you still need the simulator time. You still need the air time, but you can reduce some of those things by creating virtual versions of those.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Olivier, thank you so much. It was really, really fascinating.
Sorry for the coughing.
No, it's just fine. It's what happens. It's live. So, but really, really, I just found it fascinating. And I find aviation fascinating in general, but I found like being able to actually see what it takes to do that, I think is a kind of a good wake up call for a lot of folks that do live, because a lot of times we need to be figuring this stuff out, and all of us should be doing more of this. And so I really wanted to bring you on and have you kind of illustrate that for everyone. But I think we'll continue to have more conversations about it.
Well, if you have any questions, please.
Oh yeah, we'll have some questions for you.
I'm honored.
No, it's really, really great to have you here. So, and I was just thinking about it today, like while Olivier was talking, was that we're learning this crazy thing about aircraft and checklists and how it applies to us with someone who's just sitting in Vietnam that looks great, sounds great, has, is doing, graphics and showing us all this stuff. And I was like, what an amazing thing we built here. So anyway, I was just kind of tickled by that today, just watching you do it. And just like, you looked really good and sounded really good. And I'm just like, and I was like, and it's seamless. Like, oh yeah, it's what we call Friday, so it's just amazing, And
but
so
there are not too many flight instructors who are using a glorified webcam, which is a Blackmagic camera, and we're not too many of us doing this.
You might be the only one. I mean, it might not be many. It might be only, but anyway.
I bought this microphone. 6 weeks ago in Bangkok, and because of that microphone, I landed the day before yesterday a $25,000 contract over the next 3 weeks.
See,
just because of this.
Yeah, that is what we talk about every day. Is that how you play with this, and it's just really and again, I would highly recommend, if you have things to share, contact us, contact me, contact someone on the panel. It's a great way to being on the panel, sharing what for a day or for on different days is a great way to practice and to build this up and to play hard. And we'd love to have you. So if you're interested, let us know. Great work by the producers, just incredible questions, keeping the conversation. We always get to the top of the second hour and we start digging into it. I'm like, I hope people ask questions here, and then next thing you know, we're running over time. so really well done, and great work by the panel today. You can't do this without you. A lot of great answers and discussion in the first hour and second hour. And again, thanks to the crew in the background putting this all together. Like the fact that we do this every day, like we just put together an event where we're people coming in from all over the world. They all look good. They sound good. They look better than broadcast. I mean, we've now gotten to the point where I watch broadcast every once in a while, and I'm like, wow, that's not very good. And and so it looks better. It sounds great. It is, just really amazing work for people who are just volunteering their time to make this happen on the back end. And it's just, I've been really struck by it this week, just looking at this incredible group that's come together to make this all happen. So anyway, just incredible work on the back end to put together the show every single day, 7 days a week. So well done. Anyway, all right, now we're going to jump into After Hours. And a reminder, Amber MacArthur on at 11. The link is in my Alex announcements inside of Discord, so you can check that out. That's it. I could have just said that over top of. I know I wasn't whispering because so I'm back to what Mitchell loves. I want to get a really good flight simulator. I have this idea of spending like $10,000 on a flight simulator just so I can fly planes. Mostly, I just want to fly an A10 Warthog. That's really the one that I mean, the 320 is great, but the A10 Warthog is pretty cool. That's the one that I want. Go tank hunting.
Olivier, the funny thing is, when you're choking, the first job is to breathe before you answer questions, just to let you know. The similarities of flying and breathing.
When we have a decompression in the cabin, your first item is to put your oxygen mask, because you only have 20 seconds of useful consciousness before you become useless.
They should tell us that on the thing. I guess that would scare everybody. I always wanted to do one. It's
a memory item.
One of the short films that we're going to do eventually in Office Hours is a great one where they show you a movie